Hi, my name's Porter Ricks. I am going to be just reviewing a topic found from the textbook Environmental Science, A Global Concern by William Cunningham. The topic that I am going to just be reviewing today is system change and resilience, and I wanted to focus on three key concepts. The three key concepts are disturbance, adaptive cycle, and resilience. So I wanted to go over the kind of textbook explanation of what these concepts are, and then I wanted to show an example in a little bit more application of where we've seen this in real life, just to better connect the dots for these concepts. So the first concept is disturbance. Disturbance is any force that disrupts a community or ecosystem, altering its patterns of species, diversity, and abundance, community structure, or community properties. From the textbook, it explained that a lot of these disturbances can be categorized in two groups typically. The first is natural disturbances. Examples of these are especially wildfires or floods, other natural disasters, obviously, but the two main disturbances with some of the greatest impacts, like I explained, are those fires and floods. And then natural disturbance. Oh, and then, sorry, the second identifier is human caused or anthropologic disturbances. And that can be anything that humans have a part in creating. That could be pollution, even something as simple as building over an ecosystem or taking space away from an ecosystem in building structures or dividing those systems. And so it really can be a broad range from even just minor disturbances all the way to pretty drastic examples. The next thing I wanted to talk about is called the adaptive cycle. And the adaptive cycle was actually created in 1973 by an ecologist named C.S. Buzz Halling. He went through this process where he explained kind of the growth cycle of an ecosystem that was already just long recognized. The first two phases include rapid growth and conservation. So these two phases have been seen and recognized by ecologists for quite a while leading up to the creation of the adaptive cycle. But the rapid growth cycle is going to be the primary succession phase of an ecosystem. It's when a lot of the plants are small, when it's building from stage one, and then as it grows into a full-blown ecosystem, a well-established environment, and it enters that secondary succession phase. That's when it moves to that stage two conservation. Really, what that means, we see a lot of this in established forests, for example, as opposed to just a brand new shrubland. I always think of Hawaii with the active volcanoes creating new land, that ecosystem has to start from phase one. And that's a great just example of that rapid growth phase. And then that conservation phase, I always think of just the national parks and the immense forests that have been established by that point. Really, what Halling just introduced as this new cycle and this new idea started in stage three. He identified that ecosystems experience a disturbance, those things that we just talked about, and it leads to the reorganization phase. In this phase, an ecosystem is somewhat torn apart. It can be, for example, a wildfire where trees are burnt down, or a flood where sediment is washed away. where plants and animals are disrupted, and they have to adapt and have to change in order to just continue to live in that same environment. And then he goes on to stage 4, which is the reorganization phase. In this phase, the ecosystem self corrects, and it comes back to its original just ecosystem that it was built to be. And then that kind of leads us into the resilience concept. Something that I did want to point out in this chart that I think is important to recognize is that as the ecosystem moves from stage 4 back to stage 1, there is a possibility for exit. And this possibility for exit really is the definition of whether or not an ecosystem is resilient. So what that means, resilience is the capacity of a system to absorb a spectrum of shocks or disturbances and retain its fundamental function, structure, and identity. The best way that I had been explained this is that if, for example, there is a fire in a forest, the forest obviously is going to, be destroyed in some capacity. And the resilience of that forest can be identified, whether it's resilient or not, by its ability to continue to be a forest moving forward. Obviously, a lot of the changes sometimes are seen in terms of which plants or animals, just living organisms, communities, continue to reside within that ecosystem. But if the ecosystem as a whole continues to function as that original ecosystem, it shows resilience. Moving out of kind of the textbook explanation, I know that that's probably a lot to just all take in. I have a really great example from where I grew up, pretty close, of Yellowstone National Park. So when I was young, I remember going to Yellowstone National Park and learning about the fires of 1988. The park has some great documented pictures and histories surrounding these fires. And just for additional context, in 1988, fires had been started outside of the national park. Especially, there were 5 wildfires that were all being monitored, that were left at the moment because they were within the range of control. And just because of every factor that could have gone wrong was kind of in play. It was an especially dry, hot summer. There were just incredible, just out of the ordinary winds, and just the fires got out of control, and a lot of them started to sweep into the national park. At this point, efforts were made to try and contain the fires, but 36% of the total park acreage was actually burned and damaged due to the inability to really be able to contain these wildfires. That wasn't for lack of effort. It really was just the perfect storm that by the time everything was caught up, it was just difficult and difficult from the beginning to contain. And then they were able to hold it back and try every effort to try to mitigate those damages. And then in September of that year, snowfall actually helped put out the fires that were still remaining at that time. It was really devastating, obviously, and it was really hard to see this beautiful park and this beautiful land be destroyed by natural disasters. Some contributing factors were anthropologic, meaning that humans did have parts in starting some of the fires that eventually became uncontained. And other fires were natural, being started by lightning, for example, and then again just escalating to that point. What was really fun is learning about the recovery of this ecosystem and the resilience as it moved through that adaptive cycle. Is that there was one key plant that was awesome in helping its recovery, and that's the lodgepole pine. John Varley actually worked for the park during this time, and he gave some insight on how the park was able to recover and start recovering as quickly as it did. He said that every plant has a strategy built into its genetics to help it survive. The most famous, of course, is the lodgepole pine, which has these wonderful cones that require fire to open them. And when 80% of the park is lodgepole pine, then you can conclude that it's been putting up with fires for millennia. I really think that it's awesome that the park was already instinctively adaptive to wildfires, and it really was prepared for regrowth from the very beginning. Something that was emphasized and really just brought by the fires in a good way. Some benefits included that a lot of the animals were actually benefited from those burnt areas because they now had access to a variety of grasses, especially fireweed, that really didn't exist with the dense coverage that previously those trees had caused. It did indicate that, just in my research, that one species, the moose, did actually struggle because they ate a lot of the established vegetation prior, so especially the foliage from those trees. And so that was an example of a disturbance that maybe wasn't as resilient in this process, but it also allowed for the growth of a lot of other species and a lot of other communities and populations as the park was also regrowing a lot of its plants and vegetation. And that's it. Thank you so much.